This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a podcast about coaching, leadership, and leading through coaching. And here's your host, Scott Gress.
Thank you, Nathan. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Coaching Leader. This is the second part of our conversation with Dr. Vanessa Seifert. In the first episode, she shared her background and her story and how she got into coaching and leadership development, but also how she got to know Jesus and serves the Lord Jesus and her current work of leadership development. But in this episode, we get into other aspects of working with groups and individuals and name some of the specific leadership development challenges for pastors and church leaders and others. And she identifies the missing link that's needed for leadership development. I really think you're going to appreciate what she brings to us in this episode. So here's the second part of our conversation with Dr. Vanessa Seifert. Before we kind of pressed record, you mentioned some challenges that were in your mind and things that you were aware of and perhaps experienced and maybe more often. So maybe I could go there. Of all of those things that you might, those menu items as you described, are there a particular list of things that are typical or things that are common that you experience? So what are those challenges that you tend to run into?
Sure. I think the first one is busyness. Even as I think about both just the one-on-one coaching that I do remotely with pastors around the country, where we have scheduled monthly calls, even compared to pastors that I walk with in a continuous and ongoing model here in Nebraska, that includes both peer group and coaching, so more touches each month. Both groups of people are really struggling with the challenge of busyness. And I would say most people are. So this isn't just a uniquely pastoral thing.
Sure.
And Scott, leadership development by nature is proactive. It's future oriented, which means we need space to engage and experience leadership development. And so one of the facets of personal leadership is not only how do I create space for leadership development, but more importantly, and actually deeply rooted in leadership development, how do I get out of my way and create space for God to do the work in me that he wants to do? Busyness is the enemy of transformation, Scott.
It sure is. And one of the excuses I hear from my clients is, I shouldn't use the word excuses, but one of the things that I hear from my clients is, well, nobody wants to do it, so I have to do it. And that line from Dr. Henry Cloud, you get what you create and what you allow. So how am I, back to assumptions and mindsets, how are you creating and allowing other people not to do and you to do everything? And we kind of get ourselves caught on that hamster wheel of, well, I guess I have to do it, and then create a dependency, and it can be ugly, can it?
100%. In fact, I was just with a group of pastors yesterday, and we use the technical term overfunctioning. Overfunctioning, simply put, is doing for others what they can and should do for themselves. And so while in peer group yesterday, one pastor said out loud, we don't talk about overfunctioning in the church. And so, to borrow your words of creating a hamster wheel and being on the hamster wheel, his observation of leadership in the church is that we just don't talk about it.
And you're probably not going to hear your elder pull the pastor aside, or the head elder, and say, pastor, you're just working a little too hard. Or have you taken your day off lately? Or, what are you going to do on your vacation? It's probably not going to happen.
I don't think it will happen yet. I love the word yet until a pastor's willing and open to walk in community. I mean, we're advocates for coaches, of course. We see the value in that. But beyond the one-on-one coaching, being in Christian community, both with people that God has placed in their life as support, along with perhaps even intentional community of people wanting to walk together towards that particular growth in their lives. And it's through the challenging of assumptions, the practice and the trying on of new behaviors, and the sharing with people like elders that will lead towards important conversations that by God's grace even leads towards conversations like, what does this mean in my own life? Elder is a facet, but as a child of God, what does this mean for me? They likely just won't automatically happen though, Scott. You're right.
Yeah, and that requires a certain amount of vulnerability and honesty, and that to use a popular term or one that's in the marketplace is psychological safety. But shouldn't we be even better at that as Christians in Christian churches because we understand grace?
Yeah. Oh,
So,
yeah.
well, what other challenges are there that you experience? There's busyness, and then what else?
Yeah. So I think the second challenge even picks up a little bit with what you just said about we should kind of have an innate monopoly and just an automatic DNA in terms of practicing joy and connection and attachment. And yet that can be what I see as a second challenge is that I think sometimes in many circles we have a spiritual formation that doesn't engage our entire brain. And I know and just enough about this to be slightly dangerous. And so I will say I by no means am not a neuroscientist. And so I'm not, I can't speak super specifically about how the brain works, but I will say in my own personal leadership development, things that I have read that I continue to put in front of others as a scholar practitioner in terms of the research and how does the research align with our practices. Again, the challenge being, I really am seeing we have a spiritual formation that doesn't engage our entire brain. That research continues to show in neuroscience that the human brain develops through joy and attachment. And I recently read a book called The Other Half of Church by Wilder and Hendricks, I think. And they summarize the definition of joy as someone who is glad to be with me. And also, I think I recall being the sparkle in someone's eye. Now, if that doesn't sound like God's love for us individually, I don't know what does.
Yeah, isn't that marvelous?
And so, the neuroscience is saying the whole human brain develops through joy and attachment. This should be exuded in our Christian communities. One of the sad truths I see sometimes, not all the time, is that pastors have such a desire and call and passion for creating community for other people, and yet they don't insert themselves in the process. And because many sometimes, for a variety of reasons, don't insert themselves in the process, they aren't able to experience that joy and that attachment from other facets of the communities that God has placed them in. And so a lot of my work, even more locally, is around how do we create Christian community as God grows us together that exudes joy and attachment. And it's through these reps and experiences where we have the fruit and the confidence to replicate similar postures in our own churches and our own families. And so, again, I'm not a neuroscientist. We have right brain and left brain. And for so many years, we pitted them against each other. What I continue to read is that there's these things called tendrils in our brains where we can't oversimplify right and left. and yet we can see right and left processors in our brain. And so simply put, what that means for the local church is, this is a tough one for me personally, but the church is called and invited to put forward activities and engagements that really stimulate the right hemisphere of our brain, because it's when we have this total brain experience that we're able to access biblical truth during times of duress. And so because I believe we've had such a compartmentalized, rationalistic, overly doctrine emphasis on spiritual formation, that really is stunting our ability to receive and give joy and attachment, which is what is needed to grow us as a whole person. And let me say, this is coming from someone who's been in formalized education for a very long time with a PhD. And so I'm not demonizing it. Yet when we think about spiritual formation, it's a challenge. It's another challenge. And leadership development and spiritual formation, to me, are two sides of the same coin.
Yeah. And so I don't even know how to ask this question. So I'll just ask a question and you can take it from there. So how do you do that practically? And let me take a shot at it.
Yes.
We need to have the doctrinal teaching. We need to have the biblical teaching. There needs to be this content. You're advocating using the whole brain. And so my hunch is that it needs to be something that involves it incorporates the day-to-day living, with a debrief involved, with a celebration involved of how that content impacted our life or didn't. And so there's a learning place for learning and change and growth, but then there's also a place for celebration. Am I even close?
Oh yeah, I love what I'm hearing. Yeah.
Okay.
Again, leadership development is a big umbrella that could take a variety of shapes. As I'm talking about the second challenge of the need for us to experience and practice and model a spiritual formation that involves our whole brain, Scott, that really necessitates a continuous and ongoing model.
Yeah.
So as we think about leadership development, there's one-on-one monthly coaching that adds value. Great. I'm not going to undersell that. There are leadership development models where you travel somewhere with a cohort, you're together for a weekend, and it's like intense, and then you leave. Grapefruit, not going to talk bad about that model. My question is, what kind of results do you want from a process? And as I'm in partnership, particularly with the Nebraska district and now even with others, if the answer to the question, what results do you want to see, is something like, we would love leaders to feel like they can talk openly to a group of people that they trust, to be in an environment where their thinking can be challenged and stretched from a leader facilitator. And we want them to grow in their Christian maturity, which all impacts how they live and lead in the local church. Then the answer is yes, a continuous model. And so your question of, whoa, what does that even look like? Lots of moving parts, Scott.
Yeah.
Lots of moving parts.
And so it's not just talking about spiritual things or biblical things, but it's also, so it's growing as a disciple with that continuous model, but leadership, also that openness and engaging the whole brain is what I'm hearing.
Absolutely. The missing link is practice.
Yeah.
And so as we think about leadership development that many of us have traditionally experienced in the church, it's been all highly cognitive without any follow-up with encouragement and accountability. We haven't normalized practice and talking through and processing struggles and joys and fruits that we're seeing. And so that's just one tactical example beyond experiencing and creating joy and attachment, that we're involving our entire brain and our entire being. I mean, we can look at scripture at how Jesus apprenticed people into his ways, and there was always a practical component, always, always, always. And so, many of our pastors have experienced great and robust formal education experiences that, yes, have some fieldwork component, but those practice-oriented things were in their younger years. And so in many cases, there's a gap as leaders are called into the field and move on into serving a variety of different churches and settings where they're just not invited and involved in communities that have normalized practice.
I gotta pause here for a little bit of a commercial. I'm really pleased, and I admire the Lutheran Church of Missouri Synod Seminary in St. Louis, where in recent years they've really shifted their curriculum to include a formation model where they get together cohorts, my word, to talk regularly about. I think they have 8 character things that they've identified, and they are trying to facilitate those serious conversations, but vulnerable conversations where they can engage with what you're really describing, so that there's a level of maturity and health, before the first call. And
that's exciting. That's so exciting to hear, Scott, because as we have experiences in our deeply formative years, and then we have opportunities to engage some similar experiences afterwards, we have a context and we have a memory for how those things had been beneficial for us. So that is really exciting to me. That is really another thing I'm also really excited about is, as I continue to have conversations with those around our tribe throughout the country, there are lots of people asking questions like, how might we even reorient how pastors and leaders are gathering in terms of the process and the way we set the table, in order to experience joy and attachment even more intentionally, in addition to robust theological conversations, right? Because they don't need to be mutually exclusive of one another. And so sometimes there's great opportunity to continue to tweak the settings that are already there. And it's really cool to see God popping up different settings and environments with a very clear focus and purpose around these intentions. And they're all in the whole ecosystem of how leaders gather. And it's really fun to watch.
Yeah, and the seminary is about 3 years into this, and so they've incorporated it into all the various grades, years that students are there, and hearing a lot of positive things that are coming out of having these active formation groups outside of the academic classroom.
Oh, that's so good. I'd like to maybe take a minute to talk more practical about what the groups kind of look like, right? Because I think there are some best practice principles according to research that can be replicated, right? So I'm not selling leadership learning communities. I'm not moving anywhere unless.
Before you go there.
Oh, your commercial. I interrupted your
No. Yes. Before you go there, tell me what the third challenge is before you go to the group.
The practical piece.
I don't want to forget the third thing, because I know you had 3 challenges. We talked about 2.
You know what? And they're deeply connected. So
okay, good.
Yeah, the third challenge is, Scott, I just really believe that we can't replicate what we haven't experienced.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I remember, so as a lifelong athlete, I tend to kind of create these sport athletic milestones in my life. And I had made one by the time I turned 30. I wanted to do a triathlon. So I married a man, Brandon, who is just the best. I love him so much. He was a standout runner in college. So I always said, I am not going to be a runner, because not even in the own arena, but instead I'm going to be a triathlete. I'm going to swim, bike, and run, not just run. There was one problem, Scott. I never learned how to freestyle swim as a child. That's a little problematic. I mean, I could go on YouTube, I could read a book on how to do that, but really and truly, I'm not going to learn how to freestyle swim unless I have somebody, yes, giving me some information, but modeling it for me, watching me do it, giving me the feedback, coaching me along the way. There is no way I would have towed the line to do a triathlon without that. And we can't replicate what we haven't experienced. And so I want to be very careful to not say, these leaders are defunct, our seminaries are defunct. That's not it at all. I think that there's so many factors at play of why pastors and leaders haven't had these experiences before. And that could be a conversation for another day. The reality is, many haven't. And so that's a third challenge. And so how we move from there is to create some experiences and invite pastors into those experiences, not in a manipulative bait and switch kind of way, like to say, hey, you're going to do this and now you do it with others, but rather, how can we even talk about what we want for other people, which is intentional growth, if we're not being very open to that own work in our own life in conjunction with it, right? And so as I walk with people, part of the way through, sometimes the light bulbs go on, right? And I'll hear things like, Vanessa, are we in a lab? To which I'm like, I'm like, no, actually you are. And let me tell you, it's not something that I'm doing to you. It is a gift that God gives me because he sustains my own ongoing growth and transformation as we walk together. And so this invitation to experience what we want for others is so critical. And so what is that experience? What does that practically look like? Am I being too jargony? It really involves picking some sort of content to want to grow in. And here's the really cool thing. If you're not formalizing it, Scott, God gives us experiences that we can flow out of too. So when I say content, it's not compartmentalized content. It's content, it's experience, it's life, right? So say, for example, we're going to choose an area of content as discipleship with a few, discipleship postures with a few, right? So a group of pastors aren't strangers to discipleship. And yet, what does it look like for leaders to continue to ask themselves, how do I toggle between proclamation to all to discipleship postures with a few, in which I, as a pastoral leader, show up to my choice of a trusted few, and perhaps some more transparent ways, inviting the group of our few to engage scripture and engage the Spirit in ways that are more peer-to-peer, as opposed to my, as a pastor, his traditional posture of preacher, leader, teacher over, right? And so this journey of, yes, I want to make a commitment to dig into this topic. How might God bless how I walk with elders in such a way where he grows us communally and spiritually, as opposed to simply only just an elevated board of trustees that locks and unlocks and goes through a list of tasks, right? And so there's this own understanding of what the group is walking towards, but that isn't what the main thing is. Like, so, I can have memories of peer groups when we've got this very clear agenda. For the first 25 minutes, a pastor has shared, as you guys know, I've been discerning a call. Well, here's how the Spirit moved. Here's what's going on. And here's where we're at. That pastor has enough trust and safety with the group to just really have a brethren to let loose with. Now, some might be blessed to have a circuit setting, which is our tribe's way of organizing pastors into pods of connection, if you will. As I watch it, that's not always the norm, right? And so this is just one avenue for that. And so it's through these ongoing forms of connection over a period of 2 years, where open sharing is normalized, pair praying is normalized, having the freedom and the space to ask really hard questions out loud without wondering if someone's going to open up a doctrinal book to give the answer right away, but instead to say, I'm going to join you in the wonder and mystery of your question as we relish at the bigness and complexity of God right now. Where a group of guys are able to come together and say, I know everyone in this room right now wants the same thing that I want, and I feel safe here. And so that doesn't happen instantly. In a 2-year process, big dents are made in 6 months. At the 1-year mark, I see some really beautiful things. And at the 1.5-year mark, it's amazing. You see changes in how guys are showing up to discipleship contexts of those that they choose to be in trusting connections with, in their own settings, replicating similar postures. And I only know this because part of the process entails documenting the fruits that God is bringing. And they share those letters in community every 6 months. And the greatest joy I have in doing this work locally is sometimes I get to meet these people in congregations and the wife and families where I hear stories as well. And so just simply, I'm jumping around here, but the agreeing upon, hey, let's work towards a content area of growth. A little bit of reading, right? This isn't a formal education class. It's manageable, alongside open-ended questions. And it's this journey of, hey, you're going to be called to give voice to what you think. And you're also an adult learner. You have a funeral come up. You got something going on. This isn't a setting where you're guilted into feeling like you could write a narrative about these 3 questions, but just know this is a normal way of being. And so using group processing techniques that rotate between individual reflection for a given time, pair sharing, small groups, even the peer group as a whole. We cap our peer groups at 12, and there's great reason for that. And so I, as the facilitator, also show up to them, not only as a conversational host, but also as an academic in a way. But I really, truly try to honor the data that shows that there's great fruit in giving people short bursts of information and allowing them to riff on that and decide what they want to own to actually run with. So you won't see me at the front of a peer group lecturing for 2 hours, but I definitely do infuse the process. They have asked me to help them know what they don't know based on my scholarship and involvement in the local church. And we learn together. And so I think there's also great fruit and great value, Scott, in answering the question of how does this practically look, that we practice this as a reflection of the body of Christ. So I'm not an ordained pastor. I don't want to be an ordained pastor. As a director of Christian education from the inception, I've never been alone. DCEs are credentialed and trained and sent into team ministry settings. I have and continue to support pastors and the local church. It just has a very unique and specific flavor now. And so in many cases, a number of these guys want to grow in the area of team leadership. And so having them experience leadership development from someone who is different than them, I think also adds value, not only philosophically, but they're able to see techniques and approaches that perhaps are maybe a little bit more normal and typical in the facet of church leadership that I inhabit that maybe aren't, or maybe they are, as typical and normal as that pastoral seat. So I would say it's this combination of exploring content, practicing Christian community, very importantly, naming out loud, hey, what is it that the Spirit is leading me to do? We end each and every peer group session with both a key takeaway and a practice point. The process, Scott, is designed that when we gather again together at the next peer group, we always start after prayer and catching up, of course, with pair sharing. Hey, how are you doing on that practice point from last session that you named? What is it? What are you learning? How relevant is it still? How might you continue to advance it if it still is relevant? And so what we do is we normalize joy and attachment, and we normalize practice. We normalize working through these thoughts and feelings and emotions of guilt and sometimes even shame. And it's a beautiful picture of Christian community and how God grows us. Just one expression of it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And what I'm hearing and what I caught along the way was not only some of the details of how you structure this, what do you call them?
Peer groups.
Peer groups.
Mhm.
Um, but also because they're experiencing this themselves, it's something that they can replicate in their own context, in their own congregation, in probably small, but also maybe bigger, larger ways too.
100%. Some of the consistent stories I hear, I mean, the replication takes shape in a variety of ways, but
Sure.
I think the most consistent theme is how that I hear about is how pastors show up to their elders, which I just love. I continue
Yeah.
to hear stories of, well, it used to be just one person talking, and now we're doing pair sharing, and now we're doing customized prayer, and now I'm over time more trusting of this group of people, and I'm sharing more. And as I share more, I have this sense of God really and truly having fuller access to me as a pastoral leader. Of course, this is him speaking in the sense of this beautiful expression of the gift of Christian community. And so, of course, it translates to ministry teams and very importantly to the home, and even beyond.
Yeah.
Because 2 years
Yeah.
is a long chunk of time to repetitively do something that can have great impact for how we replicate what we do experience.
As we wrap up, maybe I could touch on the scholar part of your resume a little bit more. Um, in thinking of leadership development, in thinking of the one-on-one, but also in the group setting, the peer groups that you're talking about, and that it's an ongoing kind of thing, or that an ongoing kind of thing can be so helpful. It reminds me of some of the research from the Center for Creative Leadership from 30 years ago, where they talked about 70-20-10, or some others that I've read and listened to, where I, I just, and I know that research has made some modifications to this recently, but just the whole idea that 70% of leadership development comes down to that debriefed experience. That
Mm.
it's not so much the classroom or the content. It is some learning from others, but when you're saying this is a key takeaway, this is going to be a practice point, which I assume you're meaning, this is going to be my action step. But
Yes.
then when you get back together again and say, this is what actually happened, this is what I learned, this didn't work well, this did, I'm going to do more of that. That's that 70%. And
Yeah.
unless you give space to that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then you're going to kind of get stuck in your own mindset, which probably has some false assumptions, where you're going to stumble along the way. But this is a continuous learning.
Yeah.
So
Thank you
what
for
is your
bringing this topic up. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
so does this tickle your scholarship bone there? What
It
what
does
would you
because
say to that?
it does because I just interrupted you. So sorry about that. So I will if you want some reading, friends out there, Kirkpatrick.
Okay.
Patrick. He's got some great research on this that really points to the question, how do we design leadership development environments with the intention of achieving our hoped for outcomes? So here's what that means practically, right? If you've got like an image of a triangle, and at the bottom of that triangle, you might have like increased awareness, right?
Yeah.
And at the top of the triangle, you then might see something like deep organizational community change. Okay. And take, for example, the leadership development offering of a conference, right? What is a conference going to get us towards? Is it perhaps going to be increased awareness? something in between? Or do we really think it is going to lead us to deep organizational community impact? I think oftentimes, Scott, we underestimate the potential results of how we set the table for God to do his work in our lives. What I'm not saying is God doesn't work in our lives. What I am saying is God mysteriously uses us to set the table for others and even ourselves, for him to grow us. How we show up matters. How we invite others to show up matters. There's very clear data around the types of techniques and approaches and invitations that we can give and the results that those bring. So yes, Kirkpatrick, look up his research, ask yourselves, how am I setting tables for God to grow people? And then along the way, how are you asking those people to give voice to the fruit that God is bringing? Celebrate those things. And then if you want deeper impact, then an important question is, how might I set this growth environment table? How might I set this discipleship environment? How might I set this leadership development process table in such a way that could lead to deeper impact?
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the time. And before you go, though, if people wanted to have a continuing conversation with you or talk to you more about leadership development or even coaching, how would they get in touch with you?
Email's the best. It's really simple.
Okay.
It's my name, Vanessa at vanessaseifert.com. Another great digital landing space to just learn a little bit more about my work is my website, which again is very easy, vanessaseifert.com.
And that's VANE
SSASEIFERT.
SEI
Yes.
FERT.
German EI. See, God knew that I was going to be part of a Germanic Heritage Lutheran body and marry a German before I did. So it's the German EI in Seifert. Yes.
And for the first time ever on one of the podcasts that I host, I'm going to say, or you could go to the directory on lcmscoaching.com and look up Vanessa, and you'll learn all about her there. So
Awesome.
I really appreciate your talking to us today and your partnership with LCMS Coaching. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you, Scott. It's my pleasure. Have a great day.
All right. You too. You too.
Thank you, Vanessa, for who you are as the Lord's servant and for so generously sharing this time and this wisdom with us, and for sharing your gifts to the new Lutheran Coaching Network, lcmscoaching.com. And thank you all for listening or for watching. If you haven't caught the first part of our interview with Vanessa, remember to check it out. I know you'll be blessed. And reach out to Vanessa for coaching or leadership development for you or your ministry. And we invite you to check out lcmscoaching.com to connect with other coaches and find a coach for yourself or your ministry or project. Well, thanks for listening or watching on YouTube. God bless your leadership and leadership development, and let us know how we can be supportive or helpful. Go to scottgress.com or email us at scottgress@me.com, and we look forward to being with you next time on The Coaching Leader.